Given everything that's been in the press recently, I thought I ought to say a few words about tax increases, whether we're going to get them, and if so, when. Now, depending on what you've read, you may have in mind that could there be income tax increases, corporation tax increases, increases to capital taxation, new taxes, the digital services tax, any of those, but whatever tax increases you'd have been reading about, you'd have been reading they will have to be big to pay for the public sector borrowing, the amount that government has borrowed. Now, we know about that, and we've talked about that in the past, and it is huge. However, it's important also to bear in mind that, as I've said before, the debt can be quite easily serviced currently, so there's no pressing need to do anything about it. And both Paul Johnson from the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Paul Jessup from the Economic Institute, the Institute for Economic Affairs, have both said how dangerous it would be to impose heavy tax increases at this point, dangerous to the economic recovery, that is. They said it there, and I've just said it, but broadly that's the tone of it. But does it mean that we won't get any tax increases? Well, no. If we're going to keep on borrowing, we need to be a good borrower, as it were, someone that the markets are confident in. So at some point, we're going to need a strategic plan as to what we're going to do. What Paul Johnson from the IFS said again, we're going to have a smaller economy for the short to medium term because there's less growth. And that means we're going to have to get a little more revenue in from taxation, but not necessarily immediately because of that risk to economic recovery. So given all of that, the fact that we're going to need a strategic plan, most people expect that we are going to see some tax increases at some point in the future, but not necessarily immediately. That isn't what you'd have taken from the headlines. Headlines are based on nothing that we can see that is substantial, that is in fact given, put out by the government. It's just rumour, some based on some old statements and some old rumour, as it were, right back to May. Some suggested Treasury leaked documents. Basically, what we're looking at is the concentration over the last few days has been on capital tax increases and corporation tax increases. In relation to corporation tax, then we've seen that it's suggested that the rate could go up to 24%. And of course, like all of these things, I keep stressing, of course, anything could happen. We won't know until the budget. But 24%, that will be a significant increase at a time when we want to maintain the UK status as a good place to do business, especially given Brexit. So my rating of that will be unlikely, but you never know. Digital services tax is a new tax, only from this April, 2% on that digital economy. That's going to be continued, I think. Will it be increased? Possibly. Would it be taken away? Unlikely, given it's only just been introduced. Income tax, national insurance and VAT would be damaging to the economy, to growth, if we had increases in those taxes. So I honestly don't see that happening in the near term, although we have been reminded just recently of the Chancellor's commentary around the self-employed income support scheme when he introduced it a little while back, saying, we're giving this to the self-employed, but it does remind me, broadly he said this, it does remind me that the self-employed are national insurance, very different to employees, and that's something we might have to look at in the future. So I think the emphasis there should be on future, not necessarily immediate. And then we've got capital taxes, which I've talked about quite a bit recently. We have the OTS deeply involved in both of those, the inheritance tax reforms and the CGT reforms. And a lot of airtime was given recently to the potential of linking the rate of tax on capital gains to income tax. So basically taxing capital gains in the same way as we do income. Most people would see probably nothing wrong with that. Over 50% of the capital gains is paid by only 5,000. Tax is paid by only 5,000 people. So you wouldn't annoy that many people by changing that taxation of CGT to income tax either. So I think that's a strong runner, but it's not going to generate huge amounts of income. CGT generates around 10 billion-ish, probably a little less this year because of lower transactions and lower values, but it's something that structurally probably would be done. So tax change, almost certainly necessary to keep confidence in Britain as a country that has a handle on its financial future, if we want to keep on accessing gilt markets, the debt markets to bring money in to do what we need to do to support the economy. Changes to income tax, VAT and NIC immediately, probably not, because of the risk of economic damage. Changes to capital taxation, maybe. We'll know more, and we'll know for definite, I think, more around the time of the autumn statement in the budget. Everything we read now is rumour. I'm not saying none of what we read has no substance. Some are suggesting the government are just kite flying. Some ministers are kite flying. They put stories out in the press to see what sort of reaction they get. So as a bit of a PR, just to test, as a bit of a market review, market assessment, to see what the reaction would be to a change if it were implemented. Who knows? It all gets a bit Machiavellian. We just don't know what's really going on. The rumours are out there. We need to be aware of them. We need to be able to have a balanced conversation with our clients. So we need to keep on keeping you up to date with TechNews.